In a fantasy world, a modern-day airplane crashes to the ground. Aboard it were the 7 most talented high school prodigies, all of them from Japan. The world's top inventor, Ringo Hashi. The world's top swordswoman, Aoi Chijo. The world's top doctor, Kin Kanzaki. The world's top businessman, Masato Sanada. The world's top illusionist, Prince Akatsuki. The world's top journalist and the descendant of a ninja clan, Shinobu Sarutobi. And the world's top politician, Japan's Prime Minister Tsukasa Mikogami. These 7 people were traveling somewhere, but suddenly the airplane malfunctioned. Tsukasa wakes up in an unfamiliar place and sees a beautiful girl with pointed ears. He's concerned about the others, but the girl shows him that the rest of his peers are lying in beds in the same room. Relieved, Tsukasa introduces himself and the girl tells him her name is Leirul. She brings him some stew and feeds it to him. However, he doesn't feel well enough to eat. Concerned about him, Leirul puts a chunk of meat from the stew in her mouth and chews it up. She feeds it to Tsukasa, kissing him deeply in the process. Tsukasa is surprised but calmly lets her continue feeding him and thanks her for her hospitality. Suddenly, someone enters the room and Leirul stops, embarrassed. The newcomer has cat ears and a tail. Seeing Tsukasa, she introduces herself as Winona. Seeing that both her cat ears and tail are completely real, Tsukasa is confused. Winona explains that she's a beast person and they're in a place called Frigigard. Tsukasa tells her he's from Japan, but his hosts have never heard of such a country. Shocked, Tsukasa jumps out of bed and asks Leirul to take him to the site of the plane crash. When the girls take him there, Tsukasa sees that the plane is completely destroyed and there was no way they could have survived such a crash. Suddenly, he sees a gigantic dragon flying in the sky and calmly realizes that he and his friends are now in a world completely different from their own. A month later, the entire Elm Village celebrates their guests' complete recovery by organizing a feast. The prodigies have pretty much accepted their new lives, only Prince the Illusionist is still scared of beast people. In this world, there are both beast people and people that look like regular humans. It's rare, but some humans even have magic powers. Seeing that the children are sick of always eating bland potatoes, Tsukasa introduces the villagers to mayonnaise and everyone enjoys it. Winona remembers that there was a story about 7 heroes who came from another world. In the story, 7 heroes appeared a long time ago and saved a land that was under the control of an evil dragon. However, the village's treasurer and Winona-san called Elch gets angry, saying that the story is nonsense. He thinks that the village is spending too much money on the newcomers and wants them to leave the village, but Winona shuts him up. After the celebration, Tsukasa assembles the prodigies to discuss their current situation. Everyone ends up agreeing that their priorities are gathering information, looking for a way to get back to their world, and repaying their debt to Elm Village. The next day, Ringo the inventor modifies everyone's phone so they can communicate with them even in this world. When Tsukasa thanks her, she gets overly flustered. She also went back to the airplane and found that the miniature nuclear reactor she brought was unharmed, so they have all the energy they need. Since the crash site is near a large deposit of bauxite ore, Ringo wants to use it to produce aluminum. Suddenly, a group of Imperial guards on patrol arrives to the village. They demand food and drink from the villagers, but they don't have any to spare because most of it is going to their lord. Their leader doesn't care and wants Winona to offer him her hospitality in another way, but before he can do anything to her, Tsukasa grabs his arm and stops him. Tsukasa asks the soldiers to leave, but their leader gets angry and tells his mates to attack. However, Shinobu and Aoi instantly defeat them all. The guard's leader attacks Tsukasa, but he turns out to be surprisingly good at fighting and throws him to the ground. While the knights head back to report Elm Village to their lord, Prince stops them. He tells them he's a great magician who protects Elm Village and uses his illusions to threaten the soldiers. When they see him levitate and detach his head from his body, the Imperial guards apologize and promise him they won't mention anything to their lord. Back at Elm Village, Tsukasa encourages the others and tells them that they have all overcome impossible odds in the past, so they can do it again in this new world. Sometime later, Masato and El travel to the town of Dormant to negotiate with the Nuchenlen Trading Company, but the company's cruel leader Jakoi refuses to lower his prices. Nuchenlen is the only company that is allowed to trade in town, so Elch tells Masato they have no other choice but to sell their wares to them. However, Masato the business expert tells him he won't let himself get scammed. He thinks that the inhabitants of Elm Village should fight for their rights and announces that he'll crush the Nuchenlen company in the span this single week. Back in the village, the prodigies have been doing everything they can to repay the villagers for their kindness. Tsukasa has been teaching the villagers new recipes, but Leirul tells him that the village's food supplies are starting to run out. Tsukasa is counting on Masato, Shinobu, and Elch to deliver the necessary supplies. Winona joins the conversation, adding that Jakoi monopolized the right to trade in Dormant and is taking advantage of all the small businesses. In Dormant, Masato surprises Elch by establishing his own company called Elm Trading Company. Shinobu found out that New Chilin bribed Dormant's mayor to let them be the only trading company in town, and Masato used that information to blackmail him into letting him establish his own trading company. Hearing Masato excitedly talking about earning money, a small cat-eared girl called Rue approaches him. She says she wants to make her own living because she has had enough of living under other people. Seeing that the girl has greed in her eyes, Masato decides to let her join him, and she's overjoyed. Before Masato starts teaching Rue and Elch about business, he buys Rue some proper clothes. At a tavern, Masato advertises the Elm Trading Company and convinces people from nearby villages to give him their wares to sell in a shop he is intending to open in the town's central plaza the following day. Elch doesn't believe they can make a profit, but Masato approves and roll on the next day. At first, there are no customers, but soon Masato starts loudly advertising that his shop is cheaper than New Chenlin's and attracts a lot of people. At the end of the day, the shop has earned a ton of money. The next day, Masato sends a cart full of food and supplies to Elm Village, making the villagers happy. That night, Jakoi gets the news about Elm Trading Company's success, but doesn't worry about it, thinking they'll go bankrupt soon. However, the next day, Masato is successful again when he introduces mayonnaise to the townspeople. He even ends up making a trade deal with the captain of a grand merchant fleet called Sea Serpent. When Jakoi hears that Sea Serpent has broken off the deal with his company in favor of Elm Trading Company, he's furious. He decides to open his own store in the central plaza. However, Shinobu overhears this and reports it to Masato, who already has a plan to defeat New Chenland. Meanwhile, using the money and materials Masato brought to the village, Ringo starts manufacturing aluminum. She makes aluminum shovels, which makes farm work easier for the villagers. The next day, Jakoi orders his underlings to buy up all the merchandise in town, but he quickly learns that he can't. Masato has already signed exclusive contracts with all the traveling merchants who Jakoi fired in the past and bought all their wares. Jakoi is shocked and tries to convince the merchants to come back by offering them higher buying prices, but the merchants don't care. They won't do business with him anymore because he doesn't respect them, and they know he's going to lower the prices again later. Jakoi is in despair, having realized that his company is over with, but Masato tells him he doesn't actually want to completely destroy New Chenland. He wants to make a deal that's advantageous to him. Talking to Elch later, Masato reveals that the contracts he signed with the merchants weren't valid, and he just used them to crush Jakoi's spirit so he can make a deal with him. Elch realizes that Masato is actually a bad person, but he doesn't deny it. Suddenly, 3 men arrive and tell Masato to hand over Rue, who's actually their slave. They grab her and she's terrified, but Masato tells her he's going to save her. Rue then bites the man who grabbed her and frees herself. She says that she's going to become a merchant, earn a lot of money, and then buy back her mother and father, who are also slaves. She promises to give all the leftover money to Masato if he immediately buys her from the slave owners. Hearing this, Masato smiles and buys Rue at 100 times the price. He tells her that her courage and willpower are 1,000 times more valuable than the money he spent on her. The next day, Shinobu reports to Tsukasa. She found out that there are 4 different types of spirits: fire, water, wind, and earth. People communicate with those spirits to use magic, but there are only a few magic users in the world. In the territory of Findolf, where the village of Elm is located, the only person who can use magic is the mage officer living in Marquis Findolf's castle. Shinobu also found out about a religion called the Seven Light Faith, which believed in the 7 legendary heroes, but the religion was destroyed by the Frigigard Empire several centuries in the past. All the other religions that used to exist on the continent were also destroyed by them because they don't allow any gods to be placed above the emperor. There aren't even any records of those religions in Findolf anymore. Tsukasa wants to investigate the continent to find more information about the religions, but Shinobu tells him it's not possible to leave the territory without a travel permit from Marquis Findolf. Aoi interrupts their phone call and tells Tsukasa the public bathhouse they were building is finished. Satisfied with how it turned out, Tsukasa ends up bathing with the girls. Suddenly, Prince barges in and interrupts their relaxing time to tell them that some villagers were attacked while they were hunting. Soon, everyone runs into the forest to find them. At the same time, Masato, Elch, and Rue arrive in the village. In a forest, 3 villagers are cornered by a huge bear-like monster called the Chief of the Forest. Luckily, Oi arrives in time to save them. She attacks the bear using her sword techniques, but its armor is too thick for her to hurt it. However, she quickly manages to find a weak spot on the monster's neck and cut its head off in one slash. Meanwhile, it turns out that Holmes' village chief called Wolga was severely injured, but Keen, the prodigious doctor, thinks she can save him. She starts an operation on the spot and resuscitates Olga after she's done. When his heart starts beating again, she says that he's going to wake up in 2 to 3 days. With the chief of the forest defeated, everyone heads back to village. At the village, Masato, Prince, Leroy, and the others are visited by the captain of Marquis Findolf's guardian knights, an ominous man called Inzeji. He and his knights start arresting the villagers, accusing them of gathering money through illegal means. Even though they didn't do anything wrong, Inzeji says that simple peasants shouldn't be earning any money in the first place, which is what offended Findolf. When Tsukasa and the others return, they find the village on fire. However, it turns out that Prince actually made it seem like the building caught fire so that the villagers can escape. The only one who wasn't able to escape was Leroy, who has been kidnapped by Inzeji. Elch immediately wants to go to Findolf's castle and get her back, but Tsukasa disagrees. He says that attacking Findolf is the same as declaring war on the country, and they don't have a chance of winning. However, Winona and the villagers don't care because they don't want to be treated as slaves to the nobles. She says that helping and supporting each other is what makes them human, so they're going to try and get Leroy back anyway. Hearing how determined the villagers are, Tsukasa and the rest of the prodigies agree to help them organize a revolution against the nobles. In order for them to have a fighting chance, they will have to drastically advance Elm Village's technology. In Findolf's castle, Leroy stands before a fat, disgusting man who turns out to be Marquis Findolf. He's more than satisfied with Inzeji bringing him Leroy. It turns out that Inzeji made a deal with Leroy. She agreed to become Findolf's mistress if they leave Elm Village alone. She's prepared to happily endure any kind of abuse in exchange for her friend's safety. She tells Findolf he can kiss her, but the instant before their lips touch, sparks start flying and Findolf is thrown backwards at the wall. It turns out that Leroy is a mage and she unconsciously activated her power, after which she lost consciousness. Furious, Findolf orders Inzeji to tie Leroy up. Meanwhile, Ringo controls a futuristic cannon from a distance and mounts it on a cliff overlooking Findolf's castle. She fires a powerful missile that pierces the castle wall and allows the villagers to charge into the castle grounds. Inzeji immediately realizes they've arrived to rescue Leroy and orders a crossbow squad to start firing at them, but all the arrows are blocked. It turns out that Ringo made large shields made of duralumin for the villagers, which are both light and sturdy. Using a modern bow and arrows, Elch picks off Inzeji's soldiers from afar without them even seeing him. A group of foot soldiers attacks the rebel villagers, but Winona and Oi join in to fight them off with their overwhelming skill. At the same time, Tsukasa and Shinobu infiltrate the castle using a secret passage Shinobu found out about. However, the Imperial Mage officer Kalagale stops them. Outside, Oi and Winona show off their strength, which is so impressive that the enemy soldiers get scared. Suddenly, Prince appears standing on thin air and introduces himself as a powerful mage. He hesitates for a second when he sees the dead soldiers on the ground, but quickly gets his composure back. He starts throwing colorful smoke bombs, lying that they actually contain poisonous fog, and the rest of the enemy force runs away in fear. Inside the castle, Shinobu effortlessly dodges Gale's wind spells. Using her ninja skills, she quickly gets behind him and uses a taser to electrocute him. Inzeji and two soldiers then confront her, and she tells Tsukasa to continue ahead while she handles them. Tsukasa discovers Leroy tied up, but he's unexpectedly shot in the chest. It turns out that Findolf was also in the room, hiding with a gun. Thinking he got rid of Tsukasa, Findolf prepares to assault Leroy, but Tsukasa suddenly gets up. Revealing he had a bulletproof vest on, he takes out his own gun. Terrified, Findolf tells Tsukasa he can have Leroy if he lets him escape, but Tsukasa has no such intentions. When Tsukasa says that he and his friends won't stop until they've built a nation that's fair to all of its people, Findolf tells him that the Emperor of Frigigard would never agree with something like that. Saying that they'll change the world even if they need to take off the Emperor's head, Tsukasa shoots Findolf in the forehead. However, it turns out that the gun fires rubber bullets and Findolf just passes out from fear. When Tsukasa unties Leroy, her eyes open and start shining with an unnatural light. A voice that doesn't belong to her says that the world is being consumed by a giant evil dragon and asks Tsukasa and the 7 heroes to save the world. Tsukasa asks the voice if he summoned them to this world, but before he can answer, Leroy closes her eyes. She wakes up as her normal self and she's surprised to see Tsukasa. Hearing that he's come to rescue her, she starts crying. She feels guilty because he and the others had to do such horrible things to save her. When they leave the building, all their allies cheer for them, having completely defeated Findolf's army. Now that they started a revolution, Tsukasa thinks they need religion in order to be recognized as an independent country. Sometime later, a modern-looking truck arrives in Dormant. It opens up, revealing a stage with Thoi, Keen, and Ringo dressed in bunny costumes. Suddenly, Prince appears out of thin air and introduces himself as a god. He makes it seem like an obelisk disappeared and all the townspeople are impressed. Then Masato appears with free mayonnaise for everyone and completely wins the people over. That's how Tsukasa's campaign to make the people worship Prince as a god began. He thinks that he and the other prodigies can unite the region with the power of religion. They decide to call themselves the Seven Light Faith, thinking that someone from the real faith might contact them if they become famous enough. Meanwhile, Shinobu and Elch go into the mountains to get information about the Buttwall territory. Day after day, the Seven Light Faith would arrive in Dormant's central plaza, where they would preach their faith and distribute mayonnaise to the citizens' delight. One night, the mayor of Dormant, Khalid Walter, is visited by Tsukasa. Walter was planning to run away because he realized that the Seven Light Faith is about to take over his town, but Tsukasa tells him he wants to cooperate with him. He wants Walter to continue being the mayor but show his allegiance to the Seven Light Faith. Soon, Walter publicly appears at the central plaza and announces that Dormant is going to be governed by the Seven Light Faith from then on. The townspeople are all happy. That night, the prodigies gather in Dormant's government building. Tsukasa tells everyone they can return to Elm for now while he manages the town. He appoints Aoi as Prince's bodyguard and asks Ringo to build a new power station because they're starting to run low on electricity. He also intends to form a Seven Light Faith Knight Order out of Dormant's remaining knights. He already has someone in mind as the Order's leader. Sometime later in the Knights' barracks, the Town Watch's captain called Bernard announces that he's quitting. Finding him in a tavern, Tsukasa sits down with him. He has heard that Bernard is a strong and reliable knight, so he wants to recruit him as the leader of his new knight order. However, Bernard doesn't believe Tsukasa and the others are capable of fighting the Emperor and refuses the offer. Not wanting to give up, Tsukasa visits Bernard the following day at his house. Once again, he asks him the same question, telling him he needs someone like him. Just then, Bernard's young daughter, Eri, arrives. Bernard reveals that Eri's mother passed away from an illness, making his daughter the most precious thing to him. The reason he hesitates to join Tsukasa's knight order is that he doesn't want to be sent off to an unwinnable war against the Emperor and leave his daughter alone. Tsukasa assures Bernard that he can prioritize his daughter even if he joins his cause. He clarifies that he isn't seeking blind loyalty from him, but a companion he can trust. He says he's not like the previous ruler. He wants to eliminate inequality, creating a nation where everyone can enjoy freedom. Impressed by Tsukasa's words, Bernard decides to join him after all, wanting to build a world where his daughter can live happily. Meanwhile, in a tavern within the Buttwall territory, Shinobu disguises herself as an alluring barmaid to gather information from the Buttwall soldiers. She learns that Lord Oslo of the Gustav region is pressuring the Knights of Buttwall to launch an attack on the Findolf territory as soon as possible. When she returns to Elch, who is staying at an inn, she tells him she wants to go investigate Oslo and Gustav and see what he's really like. In Gustav, Inzaghi arrives at Oslo's court and asks him for help against Tsukasa and the rebels, but Oslo gets angry at his incompetence and cuts his head off. He intends to take care of the rebels himself. Sometime later, Tsukasa continues reforming Findolf. He manages to convince the nobles to abolish the class system there. They're not happy about it, but Tsukasa is too powerful for them to defy him. In Elm, Keen and Winona are satisfied with Olga's rate of recovery. He's eager to join the rebellion, but Keen doesn't let him go anywhere until he completely recovers. Suddenly, Rue barges in, looking completely exhausted. Masato wants her to learn multiplication, but she's having a hard time with it. Meanwhile, Ringo is almost done with her new power station and Tsukasa praises her. After she finishes it, she will start working on the means to produce guns to modernize Findolf's military. Shinobu reported to Tsukasa that Lord Oslo of Gustav can use a spell called Heaven's Flames that's capable of obliterating an entire city, so he wants Ringo to design an aerial defense system too. While they're talking, Lirul arrives and asks Tsukasa to have lunch with her because she wants to properly thank him. Tsukasa politely declines, telling her he's busy. Lirul starts thinking Tsukasa doesn't like her, but Masato calms her down, telling her he always prioritizes the happiness of the majority, so he can't be available to her at all times. That night, Tsukasa is exhausted after a long day. Lirul knocks on his door and enters even when Tsukasa tells her he was intending to go to sleep. She wants to help him relax in any way she can as thanks for rescuing her and almost sacrificing the entire village for her. Lirul tells him he's a good person who cares a lot about everyone around him, but Tsukasa doesn't think he's that great. Becoming gloomy, Tsukasa reveals that he has killed his own father, who was a politician. When he was a child, he admired him, but one day he found out his success was built on corruption and fraud. Because Tsukasa couldn't forgive him for abusing his power, he worked with Shinobu and Masato to expose him. They succeeded, but his father ended up getting sentenced to death. After that, Tsukasa's mother started hating him and thought he was out of his mind. However, he could never forgive his father. Hearing his story, Lirul breaks down in tears. She feels sorry for him, But Tsukasa doesn't regret his actions. Walking over to him, Lirul tells him he's selfish for thinking she would hate him because of his past, and Tsukasa is surprised. Hearing her words, Tsukasa finally accepts her offer to help him relax. To Lirul's surprise, he puts his head on her lap and she lets him. He thanks her for crying for him, and Lirul is happy she can help. However, the two of them don't know that Ringo, who wanted to talk to Tsukasa, saw the entire thing. The next day, life continues peacefully in the village. When Rue tells them she's still having trouble with her multiplication tables, Aoi, Prince, and Keen all remember how hard they had to work to get where they are. Since they all had their own goals which gave them the motivation to improve, Rue realizes that she also has a goal, earning lots of money and freeing her parents from slavery. Newly motivated, Rue soon passes her multiplication exam. However, her next exam is all about division, and she's troubled again. Having arrived in Kokonano village in Thika State region, Shinobu and Elche are warmly welcomed by a woman called Emerata and her daughter Melinda. Kokonano is a beautiful and prosperous place full of kind people who seem to love their Lord Oslo and the Emperor of Frigigard. After they've enjoyed a lot of delicious food and wine, Shinobu and Elche get comfortable at the inn. Strangely, Melinda tells them they should leave the village as soon as possible, but Emerata quickly takes her away. When they're left alone in their room, Shinobu suddenly kisses Elche on the mouth to surprise him and sober him up. It turns out that Shinobu was just acting drunk. She noticed that there's something suspicious. Even though they gave their guests a lot to eat, the villagers never ate anything. Shinobu also noticed that they're starving, but they use makeup to hide it. She takes Elche to an underground room she discovered earlier. Inside, there are dead bodies hanging from the ceiling, and Elche is shocked. It turns out that the villagers do their best to make travelers feel at home, after which they steal their belongings, kill them, and eat them. Outside, an important-looking female knight called Jean Leblink arrives at the village, and all the villagers are forced to leave their homes for an inspection. All the villagers pass the inspection, but then one of Jean's knights notices dirt on Melinda's right sleeve. According to Oslo's orders, all of his subjects have to look perfect, so the knights have to give Melinda a flogging as punishment. Emerata is horrified, but she's forced to smile while she watches her daughter getting mercilessly whipped. Seeing that from a window, Elche and Shinobu decide to help Melinda. Even though the villagers wanted to kill them, Melinda tried to warn them. Shinobu then appears in front of Jean and the knights. She threatens them, saying she can kill half of them all by herself. But if they stop whipping Melinda, she'll turn herself in. Noticing her shuriken, Gina thinks Shinobu is a strong warrior from the Yamato Empire and agrees to her deal. Shinobu is taken away and locked up in a dungeon, but she's not concerned because she can break out easily. Jean visits her, telling the other knights to leave them alone because she's going to torture a prisoner. Meanwhile, Elche visits Emerata and tells her he knows all about the villagers' crimes. Desperate, Emerata begs for forgiveness and explains that the villagers had no other choice. Kokonano village used to be a small farming village until Oslo became their lord and forced its villagers to make themselves and the village look beautiful. However, they had to spend their own money to achieve that, so they had nothing left after they were done. They couldn't even work in the fields because they aren't allowed to get dirty. After they've eaten all the food that was left, they had no other choice but to start kidnapping villagers. Hearing her story, Elche still can't forgive her, but he realizes that Toslo is even worse. In the dungeon, Jeannie lets Shinobu go to her surprise. She reveals that she's a knight of the Azure Brigade in the service of Count Blumhardt. The Azure Brigade worries about the future of Gusto and secretly fights against Lord Oslo, so Gina wants Shinobu to join them. At his palace, Oslo admires a golden statue of the Emperor and orders his attendant to start gathering gold for 3 more of them. He doesn't care about his subjects at all and thinks that the only way peasants can prove their loyalty to their lord is by dying for him. When his attendant tells him that the soldiers of Buchwald and Arclide are waiting for spring to attack the rebels in Findolf, he gets furious. He starts smashing his head against the golden statue and frantically apologizing to the Emperor for letting the rebels live for so long. He decides to take the matter in his own hands. Meanwhile, Lirul hears a voice that tells her the 7 heroes are in danger and she needs to guide them. Carrying a magical lance, Oslo climbs on top of his castle and throws it into the air. At Dormant, Ringo's computer declares an emergency and warns everyone about a projectile approaching them from the Gustav region. Tsukasa immediately realizes it must be Oslo's Heaven's Flames and orders Ringo to fire the anti-air missiles she built. She launches the missiles and they hit the flying lance, but they don't stop it. They just change its course a little. Hearing this, Tsukasa orders her to keep firing missiles and redirect the Lancito land outside the city. However, the lance starts evading the missiles and corrects its course, as if it had a life of its own. Finally, the lance hits the middle of Dormant Central Plaza and explodes. The flames form a huge humanoid figure that speaks with Oslo's voice and unleashes a pillar of flame reaching the heavens. As the buildings around the pillar start burning and the townspeople start panicking, Prince appears and calms them down, introducing himself as a god. He tells the people that the Empire is trying to destroy the city, but that the Seven-Light Faith is going to protect its believers. Luckily, Tsukasa has taught the nobles how to act in times of crisis, and they immediately start helping the townspeople. Oslo goes into a frenzy, summoning fire spirits all over town to unleash even more chaos. Tsukasa and the others quickly manage to evacuate the citizens, but now they have to come up with a way to stop Oslo's, who seems unbeatable. Suddenly, Lyrule rushes to their side. She tells them that she knows a way to destroy the magical lance and stop the fiery chaos. She can explain why knows that information, but Tsukasa and the others trust her. Ringo arrives, but she reveals that she has only one missile remaining. Tsukasa and Lyrule realize that the lance, having lost some of its magical power, can now be destroyed by a missile. However, the lance is embedded in the ground, making it difficult for an anti-air missile to reach it. Unexpectedly, Aoi speaks up, offering to help. She wants to run alongside the missile and manually guide it to its target. Everyone is taken aback, but Aoi firmly believes she can do it. Having covered herself in water, Aoi is ready to go. Ringo launches the missile and Aoi immediately starts running. She grabs the missile in her arms and, with incredible speed and strength, maneuvers past the fire spirits and the debris, successfully guiding it toward its target. Oslo attempts to protect the lance with his flames, but Aoi avoids his attacks until she finally finds a direct route toward the lance. Using a sword technique to cut through Oslo's flames, Aoi sends the missile on its way and it finally hits its target. As the lance shatters, Oslo's flaming figure dissipates and the fires in the town disappear. Now that the fire spirits were freed from the lance, they thank everyone in the village. It turns out that Lyrule can hear spirits and Oslo was using them against their wills. Lyrule feels bad because a lot of the citizens have died, but Tsukasa tells her that sacrifices are often necessary for a revolution to succeed and create a better future for everyone. Lyrule then tells Tsukasa about the mysterious voice she heard before Oslo's attack and says she would like to start studying magic so she can learn more about her powers. She thinks she might be able to help him more if she could use magic, and Tsukasa supports her. The next day, the townspeople worship Prince more than ever. Tsukasa tells Shinobu what happened and she's disappointed that she wasn't able to stop Oslo's attack. She tells him she joined the Azure Brigade. Later, Bernard and a squad of 50 men have been equipped with modernized rifles and coats. Tsukasa wants to attack Oslo soon. At his palace, Oslo is badly hurt, but angrier than ever. He orders his troops to attack Findolf immediately and threatens both Arclight and Buchwald to join him. Shortly, Jean and Shinobu hear about this and think it's a good opportunity for them to strike. Meanwhile, Marquis Arclight and Marcus Buchwald and their soldiers are crossing the Ruruk Mountains during a heavy snowfall. The army's morale is low and the noblemen don't agree with Oslo's decision to attack in the winter. They decide to take a rest at the Ruruk checkpoint, but it turns out that Tsukasa's army has already taken it over. The soldiers start firing their rifles, forcing Arclight, Buchwald, and their soldiers to retreat. Arclight orders one of his soldiers to spread the false news of his death among the rest of the army. By doing so, the army will lose morale and Findolf's forces will think they have already won. Arclight wants his enemies to get overly confident so he can organize a strategic counterattack. That's exactly what happens, and Bernard and his unit are surprised to encounter heavy cavalry when they thought their enemies were defeated. The riders are so well armored that the rifles can't hurt them at all. Luckily, Tsukasa perfectly predicted everything that would happen and he told Bernard what to do. Using grenades, Bernard and his soldiers quickly defeat the heavy cavalry, forcing Arclight and Buchwald to retreat for real. Meanwhile, Oslo rallies his own huge army in Gustav. While he's holding a passionate speech, an explosive arrow suddenly flies toward him. However, he notices it and deflects it in time. Jane reveals that she was the one who shot it and then orders the Azure Brigade to attack Oslo. In an instant, Oslo's entire army turns against him. In Findolf, Ringo finds out that Arclight and Buchwald hold up in Buchwald's castle, just like Tsukasa predicted. Unleashing a group of drones on Buchwald and demonstrating their destructive power, Ringo gives them a chance to surrender. The two nobles realize they're overpowered and give up. In Gustav, the Azure Brigade completely takes over Oslo's castle. Shinobu and Jean corner him and tell him to surrender. However, he refuses and prepares to attack. With determination, the girls grab their weapons and charge towards Oslo. However, he skillfully throws fireballs at them, preventing them from reaching him. Thinking quickly, Shinobu blinds him using a flash grenade, which allows Jean to try and cut his head off. Oslo stops her and Shinobu attacks too, but also fails to hit him. However, while he's busy with her, Jean manages to stab him in the side. At that moment, Shinobu throws a knife at the chandelier and falls on Oslo, crushing him. However, he's still not finished and he starts drawing a ritual circle using his own blood. Realizing the danger, Shinobu and Gia manage to escape just before the entire tower explodes. Sometime later in Gustav, Shinobu reports those events to Tsukasa. Even though Oslo's body hasn't been found, the Azure Brigade has announced that they have slain him. Recognizing Findle's advanced technology and capable leadership, Arclight decides to join the Seven Light Faith. After the crisis is over, Keen, Aoi, Shinobu, Lerule, and Ringo relax with an aroma massage. Seeing everyone's impressive figures, Ringo feels inadequate. Meanwhile, Tsukasa enjoys some tea with Masato. Suddenly, the girls enter the room to show off. They even somehow roped Prince into it and dressed him as a girl. Gail, Marcus Findle's former mage officer, has been teaching Lerule how to use magic, and in a month's time, she got to the level of one of the Emperor's elite mages. Masato suspects that the Azure Brigade isn't really on their side, and they're just waiting to recover enough to attack and get Bustate back. Tsukasa agrees. He noticed that the brigade's leader, Conrad, lied to him. When Tsukasa asked him where the golden statue of the Emperor is, he claimed he didn't know, but his face showed all signs of lying. Tsukasa wanted to get rid of that statue because he knows that Oslo would return for it if he's still alive, which would be dangerous for everyone. Since the public loves the Azure Brigade's side at the moment, Tsukasa decided to bear the costs of rebuilding Gustav. After Thaggets him the people's trust, he intends to expose Conrad's lies and corruption. Until then, he's going to let the Azure Brigade do what they want. Suddenly, Heen interrupts him and says that both he and Ringo should take 5 days off because they have been overworking themselves. Since she's a doctor, the two listen to her and Tsukasa invites Ringo to a tour of the city. When she comes back home, her computer convinces Ringo that Tsukasa invited her on a date and she doesn't know what to do. She wants to prove to him that she's better than Lerule. That's why she asks Aoi how to get closer to a man. However, her advice turns out useless because her advice includes sparring with Tsukasa or fighting for his life to make him fall in love with her. Next, she asks Keen the same question. First, she suggests they look at beautiful scenery or eat delicious food together. However, her advice ends with her using chloroform to render him unconscious. At the end of the day, Ringo takes a bath, still with no idea what to do about her date with Tsukasa. Having overheard her, Shinobu joins her, saying she's an expert in trapping men. She tells her that love is a hunt, so she teaches her some techniques she can use to capture Tsukasa. The next day, Ringo listens to Shinobu and tries to sneak up on Tsukasa when the time comes for her to meet up with him. But Tsukasa discovers her and she gets embarrassed. He invites her for lunch but realizes they're attracting attention since the people know them from the Seven Light Faith. The two decide to visit a costume shop and disguise themselves as beast people. Taking another piece of Shinobu's advice, Ringo decides to be assertive and takes Tsukasa's hand while they're walking. Gathering her courage, she goes for it, but ends up tripping. Tsukasa catches her, and she once again gets flustered. When they visit a restaurant, Ringo starts her next plan. Following Shinobu's advice, she puts her cup next to Tsukasa's, intending to pretend to take his cup by accident and get an indirect kiss. However, Tsukasa ends up taking her cup by accident and drinking from it. Ringo gets extremely embarrassed and even faints. We find out that Ringo was a genetically engineered baby destined to be a prodigy. Her exceptional intelligence even earned her a Nobel Prize when she weighs only 6 years old. At first, her mother was proud of her, but as time passed, her admiration turned into irritation and jealousy. Being a researcher herself, she couldn't take Ringo being more intelligent and more talented than her. One day, her anger finally reached its peak and she left Ringo, calling her a monster. In middle school, Ringo started asking herself why she was alive. That's when she met Tsukasa. Hearing about her reputation as a genius, he approached her and politely asked her to fix his watch. Ringo was surprised but successfully repaired the watch and returned it to him the following day. Tsukasa was happy and grateful, but he immediately asked her to fix his music player too. Ringo was confused, but she repaired that too. Day after day, Tsukasa would bring her more and more complicated devices to fix, making her spend more and more time and effort. Until then, she didn't think there was any point in working hard anymore because her mother didn't value her work anymore. However, she kept repairing things for Tsukasa anyway. One day, she told him she can't keep fixing his things because she wanted to focus on her own projects. Instead of getting frustrated, Tsukasa just smiled and told her it's all right. She wondered why he was smiling, but then realized that Tsukasa has been doing all this for her sake, hoping to cheer her up and make her feel valued. In the present, Ringo wakes up lying on Tsukasa's lap. Realizing how useless she was on the date, she starts laughing. While she was unconscious, she dreamt about her first meeting with Tsukasa. She's happy because the person she loves is so close to her and knows she can try to seduce him on another date. At the end of the date, the two are satisfied and decide to commemorate the occasion with a selfie. Tsukasa tells Ringo that Gustav is a great town and they need to protect it. Somberly, he tells Ringo he has to ask her to do something only she can do. When she comes back home, Ringo tells her computer that they're starting their biggest project yet. Sometime later, Shinobu spies on the Azure Brigade's base, Kalidaranas Castle. She found out that Conrad has left for the Imperial capital, most probably to ask for an opportunity to rejoin the Empire. A while later, an epidemic of a disease called septicemia breaks out in Gustav. Keen has been producing antibiotics, but so many people are sick that there isn't enough. Melinda also falls sick and Emerata begs Prince to help her. 3 members of the Medical Guild of Gustav arrive and make fun of Prince for being unable to cure his followers despite presenting himself as a god. The guild's leader, Cerentius, wants to give Emerata some of his secret medicine, which is actually opium, but he can't because Keen has forbidden its use as medicine. Cerentius is telling Emerata to abandon her belief in Prince if he wants him to give her opium. Suddenly, Prince speaks up and says that the Seven Light Faith is going to cure Melinda together with everyone else. He says that he bestowed a healing power upon Keen, who is his angel. Keen herself then enters the room and confirms Prince's claims. Even though she's short on antibiotics, she reveals that she has another solution, revealing a lump of coal. While he's leaving, Cerentius laughs at Keen and tells her she'll have to lift her ban on opium if her new cure doesn't work. Later, Keen decides to use Lerul's magical powers to help her manufacture her medicine. Under her instructions, Lerul uses her magic to steam the coal and separate the coke from the coal tar. Next, she heats up the coal tar and transfers the steam from it into a pot to make benzene. Keen then pours sulfuric acid into it and some other ingredients. In the end, the result is humanity's first antimicrobial medicine, sulfonamide. Quickly, Keen returns to the hospital and everyone helps her administer the sulfonamide to the sick. Soon, the patients start recovering and everything turns out fine. That night, Cerentius meets up with the members of the Medical Guild. He saw that Keen managed to create real medicine from coal, but he knows she used Lerul's help. He wants to threaten Lerul and make her change all the medicine into poison to ruin the Seven Light Faith's reputation. However, Keen is one step ahead of him. She expected him to try doing something, so she secretly entered their hideout. Throwing acupuncture needles at them, she paralyzes all 3 men. When Cerentius wakes up, he sees her take a bone saw and prepare to cut open his skull to modify his brain. Cerentius begs her to stop, but Keen just laughs maniacally. She tells him that she isn't an angel like everyone thinks she is, and that she hates God for creating humans with so many flaws. She reveals that her goal is granting human bodies eternal life and creating a perfect world. The next day, Cerentius has a bandage around his head and his personality completely changes. He starts fully supporting the Seven Light Faith. Sometime later, Conrad visits one of the Imperial generals, a man called Neuro. Neuro thinks that Conrad did the right thing by overthrowing Oslo, because he didn't approve of his attitude toward his subjects. However, he doesn't support Conrad aligning with the Seven Light Faith. In order to help Conrad destroy them, he gives him 10,000 troops and a mysterious and powerful masked man called Tanganika. He's so powerful that he can conjure heaven's flames in an instant. In her lab, Ringo shows Tsukasa a large machine he told her to make. She's unsure she should have built it, but Tsukasa tells her it was necessary. On top of Urana's castle, Jean of the Azure Brigade is attacked by her own allies who were ordered to kill her. Their leader, a knight called Razenak, reveals that he killed Count Blumhart, the man who first created the Azure Brigade, and Jean is shocked. Just before the knights kill her, Shinobu arrives and rescues Jean. The 2 girls face off against Razenak and Jean ends up stabbing him through his head. After the fight, Jean tells Shinobu that Blumhart was important to her, and he made her the woman she is. Shinobu then takes her to a secret underground shelter beneath Urana's castle. There she shows her the golden statue of the Emperor that Conrad stole. Seeing it, Jean is furious because a lot of innocent people died of starvation to finance the statue's creation. She starts crying, remembering that Blumhart originally founded Azure Brigade on the ideals that people should help each other and live nobly. Shinobu consoles her, telling her that those values are still present in her. She tells her that the Seven Light Faith will accept her and that she should come with her. Suddenly, Conrad and Tanganika enter the room so Shinobu and Jean hide. When Tanganika sees that Conrad smashed the golden statue of the Emperor in order to hide it, he tells him he should be ashamed of himself. Suddenly, Tanganika reveals himself as Oslo and burns Conrad to death. He now has a red gem embedded in his chest, which was used by Neuro to resurrect him. When he notices them, Shinobu and Jean run away. Going berserk, Oslo chases after them while burning everything and everyone in his way. While the girls are escaping on horseback, Shinobu calls Tsukasa and tells him that Oslo is back and stronger than ever. When Tsukasa tells her something, she's shocked and tells Jean they need to hurry. Going completely insane, Oslo summons 4 heaven's flames at once. However, before he can throw them, a powerful missile hits him from above, leaving behind a massive explosion and completely demolishing both him and Irena's castle. Shinobu reveals that the missile is called God's Thunderbolt and her friends launched it all the way from Dormant. In Ringo's lab, Tsukasa congratulates her on a successful missile launch. He says that he intends to forge a pact forbidding the use of heaven's flames, but before that, his nation has to prove that they have an even more powerful weapon. They have to be on equal ground with the Empire so they can negotiate. Because of this, he thinks the power of God's Thunderbolt serves to achieve happiness for the people of the world. Taking his hand, Ringo tells him she knows he's always working hard for the happiness of others. The next day, the townspeople gather and Gustav and the 7 prodigies appear before them. Tsukasa announces that he has spoken with the Azure Brigade and reached an agreement to surrender the land of Gustav to the 7 Light Faith. Right now, the 7 Light Faith controls Findolf, Buchwald, Arclide, and Gustav. Tsukasa announces that his religion's goal isn't ruling over their subjects, but establishing a republic where everyone would be equal. Not wanting to be exploited by anyone ever again, the townspeople agree with him. With the townpeople's support, Tsukasa announces that the land the 7 Light Faith is controlling is from now on called the Elm Republic. At that moment, a huge pillar of flame rises up from the center of town. Tsukasa is surprised, but he calmly orders the townspeople to be evacuated. He sees that Oslo is in the center of the flames, but knows that there's no human who can survive God's thunder. Suddenly, Oslo's body is covered in a hard substance and he turns into a complete monster. Shinobu and Aoi immediately charge at him, and Lerul tells them to aim at the red gem in his chest. Oslo throws fireballs at the girls, but Aoi still manages to reach him and strike at his red gem. Cracked but not shattered, the gem starts shining and Oslo goes completely out of control and charges toward the rest of the prodigies. Tsukasa starts shooting at him with his gun, but can't slow him down. Oslo jumps at him, but before he can attack him, Tsukasa shoots his red gem and breaks it. Stopping, Oslo recognizes Tsukasa as the leader of the rebels. He tells him that true equality doesn't exist because man is a sinful creature that can't be saved. He says that the entire world exists for the Emperor, before crumbling to dust and disappearing. Sometime later, Tsukasa wakes up from dreaming about Oslo's last words. He realizes that he's an imposter. All the other prodigies are true geniuses who have perfected a specific set of skills, but Tsukasa thinks he's using methods and conducting politics in a way anyone else could. He starts doubting that he can defeat the Emperor. Later, all the prodigies and their friends gather around. They're all impressed by modern-style mayonnaise bottles Ringo designed and made in her free time. Together with the villagers of Elm Village, the prodigies drink and have fun together. Tsukasa continues doubting himself, but Lerul and Ringo manage to cheer him up. They make him realize that he's surrounded by friends and allies and can achieve anything with their help.